go. Okay, so we are very, very pleased to have Dr. Zoltán Dörnyei with us tonight. Thank you very much. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and good evening, Tokyo. It's Friday morning here in Nottingham. I'm sitting in my office. I think I've seen one person in the whole building. It's been a curious 6 months. I come in every morning, spend the working day here, and sometimes I am alone in a 3-story building. Sometimes I see one more person, and it's very peaceful. A university without colleagues and students can be a real blessing. Thank you so much for the invitation, Jackie and Jolt. It's a real pleasure. You know, some of you might know that I have a special connection with Japan. My son Benny has done Japanese as his university major here in Britain, and is now at the moment studying at Osaka University. So as soon as they allow foreigners in, visitors, I'll be there visiting with my family, and hopefully it's going to go on for several years. Okay, so just to check, is everything okay? The connection, the picture? Yes, everything is fine. Let me kind of try out the sharing, sharing my screen just to check. But then I'll come back again and, say a few initial words before I go to the PowerPoint. Okay, so let's just, okay, so I am sharing the screen now. Does this work?
Yes, it looks great. Great.
Excellent. So I'm going to go back a little bit more to the main screen, and let me just the participants. Okay, I don't need that. I'm trying to. Oh, it's the chat. I'm trying to kind of clear my screen, but I don't want to click on things. I'm afraid of losing the connection. Okay, when Jackie invited me, actually, I said, I normally don't accept invitations for such online talks because I quite frankly, I don't feel very confident at it. I don't think I'm very good at it. So what we said was that, okay, this is going to be a slightly more informal things. Okay, so there is going to be a presentation, and I'm going to talk to you about something which is really, really special for me, and something which is absolutely cutting edge and new, and you are the first people who will hear about it in person. But there are few slides, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details. It's more like I'd like to actually share with you a framework of long-term motivation, lots of kind of little personal stories. And then at the end, I'd like to actually open this up. So we agreed that there could be as much as 30 minutes of question and answer sessions. Okay, so it's early morning. Well, not early morning, but it's morning here, so I am okay. It's the evening over there. Okay, so okay, let me just say. This is, long-term motivation, and 23 years, it was 24 years ago that I and my family actually came over to the UK from Hungary, where I am originally from. You can probably, well, you can hear in my accent that I wasn't born in the UK. My wife is British. But we spent quite a bit of Hungary, and 24 years ago we came over, and I was at a job interview at Exeter University, where they asked me, as part of the interview, what would be your main academic ambition? And I immediately answered that to publish a motivation theory, a motivation model in one of the mainstream psychology journals. So not applied linguistics or bilingualism, but psychology journals. And then for some reason, I did publish one article in the British Journal of Educational Psychology, but then for various reasons, I stopped actually publishing in the psychology field. You know, it was enough. Applied linguistics was big enough for me. I was happy here. I had other interests. So over the last 20 years, it's been mainly publishing in applied linguistics until last year. Suddenly, I saw in my email inbox a message from Andrew Elliott. Now, some of you who might know motivation theory, will know that Andrew Elliott is one of the great ones, the great American psychologist. He is known for the theory of achievement, approach and avoid motivation. He has edited handbooks. He is one of the top 6 most cited motivational psychologists. So I first thought, is this the Andrew Elliott? But it was the Andrew Elliott. And basically, he invited me to write a summary of almost like the research program which I've been leading in the field of applied linguistics for an annual, which is called Advances in Motivation Science, which is probably the most prestigious publication in motivational science. It comes up, one volume comes out every year. I will show you in a minute the exact details. So one volume comes out every year. There are 6 or 7 invited papers in this volume. And the people include, well, you name the most famous motivational psychologists: DC, Ryan, Eccles, Wakefield, Wiener. It's a real honor to be invited. So I said to him like that, well, as they say in Hollywood, I didn't see this coming. And I was very, very pleased and so, wrote a paper with a friend, Alistair Henry, submitted it. They were very pleased with it. It was accepted. So it's coming out next year. And then, to cut this long story very short, then I realized that I actually had just fulfilled my dream of 20 years ago. I said I would love to actually, publish a motivation model in a mainstream psychology platform, and it happened. And I only realized that this happened after it had been accepted. So I didn't know that, well, this is it, this is the big thing, okay? So this is the first time, part of this, and now I'm going to share now because my PowerPoint, okay. Okay, so, Jackie has got a copy of the PowerPoint and I think it will be shared. So, don't worry if you can't get everything. And I still have to, yes, okay. I tried to just move the little pictures onto the other side. Okay, so here is, unusually, we'll start this presentation with the further readings, because the first one is this chapter, which I was talking about. So accounting for long-term motivation and sustained motivated learning, motivational currents, self-concordant vision, and persistence in language learning. And this chapter is an extended version and kind of psychologized version of something which I presented in a book last year, Innovations and Challenges in Language Learning Motivation, chapter 6 was on long-term motivation. And a short version of this was published, this year in the 3rd edition of Teaching and Researching Motivation, which Emma and I have, this is the book which originally came out in 2001, and then the 2nd edition came out in 2011, and now 10 years later, the 3rd edition came out, and it's a completely rewritten and updated version. So, it's a bit of a, quite a long introduction, but I just like to actually, I wanted to share with you the fact that this is something which is deeply personal, and also something which I see as, perhaps the culmination of my research of the last 3 decades. Okay, and the chapter which is going to come out is also kind of offers the journey, a description of the journey of how we got there. So it starts with Gardner's theory of motivation and how it actually ended up with long-term motivation. Okay, if I don't know when they are going to make it. It's going to be one of those advanced publications on their website. The book will come out next February, they promise. I don't know when it will be available. I was just thinking whether I am allowed to share a copy or not at this stage. I'm not quite sure yet. Okay, so shall we start? And in order to set the scene, let's just look at basically the 3 main areas of motivation. And most of you will know this. So whenever we talk about motivation, we generally include 3 things. One is the why question, why you do something. So the choice and the direction of a particular action. Okay? And then the second one is the how hard you do it. That is the effort expanded on it. And finally, it's how long you sustain the action. That is the persistence with it. Okay? And the curious fact is that the 3rd dimension, persistence, has received far less attention in past research than the other components. And this is very curious. And in this chapter for the psychology volume, we write quite a lot about this, about psychology's unease about talking about time. Psychology is not very good at talking about time. Process models, there are some, but they are not, they don't sit comfortably within the field. So there are several reasons why this situation happened, but for us, the important point is that it's very bad for language teachers, second language acquisition experts, because language is one of those areas where long-term kind of learning, sustained learning is indispensable to reach any results. So in a way, of all the areas here, the 3 areas, probably persistence is the crucial area for motivation to learn a language. And this is the area which very little has been done on. So in a way, I always felt that this is something which researchers still owe the teaching profession. So we need to actually be able to have a model of long-term motivation so that we know how we can promote our learners' long-term motivation. Okay? And and basically the model which which I published in that chapter I think is the first kind of comprehensive model of long-term motivation in psychology. So we'll see what the reception will be, how mainstream psychology will, accept or receive something coming from one of the, the peripheries, kind of language learning motivation. We'll see. Okay, so this is just to set the scene, to show that what I'm going to talk about today is one of the key issues in motivation research, but also key issues in the practical aspect of having learners who actually sustain their learning and reach success. Okay, let's so when I was thinking about it, how can you describe long-term motivation? And I'm going to show you this. These are the main components of a framework. But before that, let me just share with you the challenges of this. So there is so much involved in keeping someone going for years and years. You can imagine that all sorts of environmental factors, personal factors, cooperate with each other or interfere with each other. And so I was thinking, so no wonder psychology has found it difficult to actually, or even kind of almost like forbidding the challenge, to come up with something. So what I tried to do is I tried to be very, very down to earth. And I thought, okay, we are talking here about a journey. Let's take a car journey, a long journey. What do we need to be able to go far? So what is needed to do an incredibly long journey, round the world kind of journey, or it's a big international car journey. And I just started to list things, and I realized that these analogies work quite well with language learning. So it almost gave me some clarity, because for a car journey, to start with, you need a full tank of high octane fuel. Then you need a kind of vehicle which is characterized by fuel economy, but then also, hopefully, it has a hybrid engine that can regenerate some of the fuel. So you don't just spend, and exert energy, but you can somehow regain some of it, okay? And then you need, obviously, regular opportunities to refuel. And then you need a general kind of breakdown cover to deal with any mishaps, because in a long journey, mishaps, problems will happen, okay? So as you can see, there are 5 kind of components highlighted in reddish, okay? And I think that's a pretty comprehensive framework. So what actually we need to see is how these can be translated into motivational terms, so that then we can translate those into practical terms, how to motivate our learners. Okay, so basically the rest of this talk, about the next 20 minutes is taking these 5 things one by one. And then at the very end, there will be a conclusion which simply lists the 5 key strategies. And that's when I like to stop and open up things, because that's where you can comment, you can suggest things, you can ask questions, because it's suddenly very classroom specific and real and relevant to language learning and teaching. Okay, so we'll start with the high octane fuel. And basically, I translated that to self-concordant vision. Now, that's a big mouthful of a phrase. So let's start with the beginning. One thing we know about human action is that it's goal-directed, okay? And therefore, traditionally, a goal has been seen in psychology as the fuel that energizes action. This is why goal theories have always been really popular in psychology, okay? So our task here is how can we make this high octane? So how can we fortify the goal? Because clearly, if we are setting out on a big journey, we need some very powerful initial goals. And basically, psychology knows two ways of kind of amplifying, fortifying a goal. One is adding to it vision. Hold on, just yes, one is adding to it vision, that is mental imagery, and I'm going to say something very briefly about this. And the other one is making it self-concordant, which is just a kind of very, almost like posh word for self-relevant, but they wanted a special word to show that this is something which is personally, truly meaningful, something which is genuinely aligned with someone's core beliefs and values and wishes and hopes. So something which is self-concordant is almost like it comes from the heart. Okay, so adding vision, and that's, mental imagery is a very well-known thing in psychology. We are not talking here about, some kind of new age, new psychology thing. Mental imagery, it's been known, Shakespeare coined the term to see in the mind's eye. And basically, since then, psychology has established that this is a genuine, powerful phenomenon. Basically, human beings are able to imagine things with almost as much clarity as seeing the same thing. And the reason is, and you know it best from your dreams, when you entirely rely on your kind of internal seeing system. And the reason why the two things are so close, seeing and envisaging things, is because the brain uses virtually the same kind of cerebral areas to process those two things. So 2/3 of the brain areas, the cortical areas, coincide. Okay, now you can always, this is one of those things which we do all the time, visualization. If I say to you carrot, most of you won't be able to even resist seeing a little bit of red somewhere in your mind's eye. Okay, so we do this all the time, and the point is that we can do it intentionally. It can be a conscious thing. And you are going to host the Olympics very soon. Now, every single Olympic athlete who enters the Olympics and reaches Tokyo will have gone through visionary training. And so this is something which is well known. It's got methodology books of how to do it. Even in applied linguistics, we have kind of volumes on how you can actually do visual exercises. Jane Arnold actually edited a volume with Puchta once. Jill Hatfield and I have written a kind of practical book about this. Okay, so the first thing is basically something which probably is most familiar, is adding vision to a goal. So making it more powerful by not just having an abstract goal, but imagining yourself reaching that goal. And the second thing is somehow making that goal personally very relevant. And the whole point is to create a special relationship with the language. And this is something which is absolutely, absolutely new. During lockdown, I started to, I had to produce online materials for my students. And one task which I did, it was based on Padlet, which is one of these internet-based whiteboards, and the students can post things and everybody can see everybody else's. So Untitled, I asked them to come up with stories of really successful language learners. And language learners who beat the odds, who reach native-like proficiency, even without spending a lot of time in the host environment at an early age, okay? Something which I always wanted to achieve and never managed. And we are just finishing a massive research project. You know, when we have 30 exceptional language learners with whom we have conducted deep interviews, 500,000 words, the corpus. It's going to come out next year. Multilingual Matters has actually contracted this. So it's going to be 2 volumes, lessons from exceptional language learners and stories by exceptional language learners. And here, one of the key things which came up is that exceptional language learners have this kind of unique, special, personal relationship with the language. And sometimes they can't even explain what it is. You know, whenever they first came across the language, they just knew that it was it. You know, and 2 of the 30 people said, you know, that, you know, perhaps in my previous life, I was a member of that community, which of course, me being a good Christian, I completely ignored, but at the same time, it shows that there are some very deep kind of relationships. Now, what I'm trying to say is that this I think is more generally a key to language learning success, to create a special relationship between the learner and the language. And this high octane fuel is something which can achieve that, you know, vision and self-concordance. Okay, need to go on to the next one, which is fuel economy. So one thing which is one of the most exciting new findings in psychology is that motivational energy is a limited resource, okay? So basically, you know, this kind of mental strength to do something, to resist temptations, you know, to get your act together, it's something which is almost like a resource pool. Because once you have resisted temptation for a long time, you are almost like depleting this pool, and it's much easier to give in then. Or once you've done certain things, you know, using your willpower, the willpower will start actually running low, and you need to refuel it. So this is something which, you know, which is an incredibly controversial but incredibly popular new theory. It's the last 10 years, and it's being championed by Roy Baumeister, you know, who is one of the key, you know, main psychologists specialized in identity research. But the point is, for us, is that long-term motivation cannot rely entirely on willpower. You will just, you know, nobody really has it unless you are one of these superheroes. So what you need is, you need to conserve your energy. And one way is to use habitual actions and behavioral routines. Okay, so habits, the good thing about a habit is that it doesn't have any motivational costs. So let's take some very simple habits. Your going to bed routines, you know, you go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, do all sorts of things. You do those semi-automatically. You don't have to have, most of the time, a big kind of internal discussion in yourself doing cost-benefit calculations. It's just part of life. Or when you go for a run every morning at 8 o'clock, you know, it becomes an automatic part of your life. So again, you don't have to spend willpower kind of energizing it. Okay, so this second big component, which kind of promotes long-term motivation, is to set up appropriate goal-specific learning habits. And we are talking here about very straightforward things. For example, every evening before going to bed, I'm going to go through my vocabulary list. Or at 8 o'clock, I listen to the BBC News, or I watch CNN. Or every day I spend at least 15 minutes, reading a newspaper, okay? The point is that as soon as you actually create a kind of a routine, a recurring behavioral pattern of it, it will be easier to do it. You won't have to kind of constantly agonize, whether to do it or not. It's just part of life. And what we find is that with long-term, learners who have this long-term motivation, they are very good at setting up these, nice kind of frameworks and patterns to almost structure their learning. Okay, so far so good. So it's basically we had 2 of the 5 things. And here is the third one. And this is probably the most novel of all the 5 components. So this is regeneration. Okay, you have to realize that motivational theory in the past traditionally assumed that motivation was a little bit like fuel in the car. You fill someone up with motivation, and then it runs and runs and runs until the motivation runs out, okay? So, it's one of those resources which you generate and then use up. Now, can you actually regenerate it? And you would think, no. But then we saw in the car industry, and, Toyota was the forefront of this, we saw that actually hybrid cars exist. So you can design an engine which generates energy while, during movement. That's very clever. And the question for me was, can we do it actually, can we replicate this in motivational terms? Okay, so, and rather than just going through this slide, let's just imagine you are on a diet. And the diet is typically a long-term motivational, behavioral kind of issue. You have to make sacrifices, you have to, resist temptations, you constantly use your willpower, and it's got to be sustained, otherwise it doesn't work. Now, what they do in these dieting clubs, but also personally, every morning or at set times, you step on the scale. And if you register that you are, kind of, that you have lost weight, suddenly it gives you such satisfaction, that it almost like refuels your kind of, the energy, the momentum. Now, this is because what happens is that you have a kind of progress check. And, that's a very simple progress check, very efficient. But you can do that with any activity to break the activity down into sub-goals, little bits, targets, and then meeting those goals one by one will create the energy to go to the next one. So that, a lot of processes are organized like this. Just as some of you may know that the Duke of Edinburgh Prize, which is in Britain, one of these biggest youth movements when young people for 2 or 3 years have to meet various challenges simply to become, better people in some way. So there is, the final thing is that they could actually go to a meeting, at a ceremony with the Duke of Edinburgh. Well, they can't do that anymore, but the success of the scheme was that they had this kind of step system. You had bronze and silver and gold levels, and in each of those you had to achieve certain things. So it was a stepwise thing and a stepwise process, and it used the success breeds success kind of principle. You successfully completed one step, and that gave you the momentum to go on to the next one. Okay? So what we find is that in long-term motivation, if we have a process where progress is clearly marked, then the goal pursuit has the potential to become self-sustaining, just like a hybrid car. Okay? So we've covered now 3 of the 5 main components of long-term motivation. And here is the 4th one. So we need additional fuel, because even, a hybrid car will run out of petrol. So you can never completely regenerate all the energy which you exert. Okay? And here is where emotions come in. Now, recently in the literature, in the second language literature, there has been quite a lot about the relationship between emotions and motivation and learning success. And we know in a way that emotions are kind of motivating, but in a strange way. So if you are angry, you are desperate to do something, or, but you don't quite know what very often, and sometimes do very silly things. So what emotions do is they don't give you direction. So, so they are not motivational in general, but they amplify existing urges and drives. Okay, so it's almost that emotions are the perfect supplement, to amplify motivation. And of course, practicing teachers know this very well, that positive experiences will motivate learners. Okay, they won't tell you, kind of direct learners exactly to do things, but they will actually just increase their general momentum, their general kind of energy level. Okay, so the goal is to ensure that people have ongoing positive emotional experiences during the long-term goal pursuit. And how can we do that? And there are at least 3 possible sources to do that. One is when you pursue a self-concordant goal, and you remember, self-concordant means that it's personally really, 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 really important. When you successfully pursue such a goal, it's very satisfying. You have this kind of deep-seated satisfaction that you are doing what you've been created to do, kind of thing. Also, vision and visualization can generate positive feelings. Olympic athletes, do this all the time. There was one Olympic athlete who actually gave an interview to Tim Murphy. Most of you will know Tim Murphy, or many of you have heard about Tim Murphy. And Marilyn King, this Olympic athlete, said every morning when she woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning because the alarm clock went off and she had to start her training, she imagined herself walking into the Olympic Stadium, and she was filled with the excitement, as if she was there in the stadium. Okay, so so simply visualizing positive things can generate positive feelings. And this is well known in psychology. That's why you have this kind of good kind of guided imagery sessions, the imagine yourself in a beautiful meadow, the sun is shining, can you feel the grass under your feet? So creating an idyllic environment fills you with the emotions which you would feel in the idyllic environment. The third thing is actually what I found very interesting is that the third source of motivation, it comes from our research on directed motivational currents, which I'm not going to go into it, but basically, if you have a very, very desired kind of aspired to target, then every step towards that target will replicate almost in a fractal manner the same joy that you anticipate with with reaching the target. And I remember this myself, that when I was desperate to learn to drive at the age of 18, because I loved the Beat Generation's literature in America. Kerouac's On the Road was my favorite novel, and I thought that the best thing one can do with their lives is to drive from New York to San Francisco and back, and this is the meaning of life. So I was desperate to get my driving license. And I remember as soon as I was 17, I enrolled in the course. And of course, what do you start with? The very boring theory part. And I still remember that I enjoyed every moment of learning the highway code. All those boring things, that what speed can you drive the car when you are towing a caravan on a bridge? And then all these very silly, very boring things. And I remember I enjoyed it. And I still remember that I thought it was weird that I enjoyed it. That I thought, you shouldn't enjoy this. But this is the kind of thing, when you have this kind of very, very powerful self-concordant vision, approaching that vision can generate passion. And in psychology, recently, there has been a lot written about the theory of passion, which actually encapsulates this. Okay, so in my original timing, I've got something like 3 or 4 minutes left, and we only have one more thing left. Probably I'm going to run over by 2 or 3 minutes, because this last thing is perhaps the most practical of all everything. It's about the motivational breakdown cover, which I translated as self-control capacity and skills, okay? And the idea is this, that just like if you go on a long journey in a car, there might be problems. And your journey might be cut short simply by the fact that something happens to the car and you cannot go on. But if you have a good breakdown cover, you just call the number, they come out, they sort things out, and you can continue the journey. Now, the same thing happens in any long-term action. There will inevitably be low moments. There will be obstacles. Everybody, even the most dedicated and disciplined people, will feel demotivation over, a sustained behavioral sequence which lasts for years, perhaps, and language learning should. Okay, so the final ingredient of long-term motivation is the capacity to resist the discouragement, when problems occur. The capacity not to get demotivated, to bounce back. And this has got several aspects to it, but the 2 main components is that there is a personality component. Some people are simply better at bouncing back. And this has been described by, recently, it's very popular, grit, or resilience, or persistence, or self-control, hardiness, buoyancy, okay? So, so we somehow recognize that certain people have just simply more character strengths than some other people. And this has been shown very well in the famous Marshmallow Experiments. You know, probably many of you have heard about these things, that little children were given a choice. Either they can have one piece of marshmallow now, or two pieces if they wait 15 minutes. But then they have to sit there, watch the marshmallow, and not touch it for 15 minutes. And they did this originally in the 1960s, and the big recognition was that when they went back to those children, you know, and children varied. Some people ate the marshmallow straight away, were not interested in waiting. It's called delayed gratification, you know, the self-control to wait. Some others, you know, waited and got there, the two. And of course they were filmed, and they were struggling, and they did all sorts of things. 20 years later, they went back, revisited the same, well, not children anymore, young people in their 20s, and they realized that whether or not they were successful 20 years ago still correlated quite highly with their level of success as young adults, okay? So basically, there is something innate. But the person who actually ran these experiments, a person called an Austrian-American Walter Mischel, he actually also said that what he noticed was that the best kind of people the best young people who managed to delay the gratification used conscious strategies. And he said, and those conscious strategies can be promoted, can be learned. And so it's not one of those things which is entirely kind of genetic or based on your education. This is something which is trainable. So self-control skills can be consciously promoted. And then I have here two slides just giving you some ideas. One thing is by Baumeister, the same person whom I told you about this ego depletion theory, the limited resource. He also talks about the self-control muscle. And he says, basically, it's just like a muscle. If you become self-controlled in any area, it will transfer to other areas. You just generally get more disciplined, okay? The second thing you can do is thought control. So you can, and that's what children did when they were watching the marshmallow and wanted to resist. They were thinking of the two marshmallows, or they were deliberately avoiding the temptation, looking at the marshmallow, and were thinking deliberately. Someone once said, I was thinking of my superhero, you know, so trying to distract themselves. So thought control is very important. And the third one is an incredibly interesting thing which not many people know about. And in psychology, this is given that this is one of the most useful things. It's called implementation intentions, which are basically if-then plans. So it's almost like you create purposeful habits. If this happens, I'm going to do this, okay? You decide in advance, and when it happens, you do it automatically. And if it happens several times, it becomes an unconscious automatic thing. And I just have here two quotes, one is by this Walter Mischel, the Marshmallow Experiment researcher. In life, employing if-then implementation plans has helped adults and children control their own behavior more successfully than they had imagined possible. And then here is from a very recent article, which is, I think, an excellent article by Moschons and Hoyle. I really, really recommend this article to you, and it's quite accessible, okay? It says, implementation intentions are one of the most effective strategies for promoting persistence. Here comes the conclusion, and let me just move. Okay, so all in all, I was talking about 5 areas of long-term motivation, almost like 5 components, 5 dimensions, and each can be associated with a key strategy. And just to go through them once again, this is the very last slide. 1, fortify the initial goal by adding to it vision and making it self-concordant. That is, in order to create a special relationship with the second language. Okay? The second is set up appropriate goal-specific learning habits. The third one is generate ongoing motivation through ensuring that learners experience tangible progress. The fourth one is make sure that people have ongoing positive emotional experiences. And finally, develop the learners' self-control skills through exercising their self-control muscle, practicing constructive thought control, and forming implementation intentions. My final kind of sentence would be that I think these all make sense. And why I commend to you this framework is because I am pretty convinced, and if you read the chapters or the material in the on the first slide, I think I produce enough evidence from the literature that this is it. So these are the key things. So we are talking about a very complex thing, how to sustain your motivation for years. It boils down to these 5 key issues. If you get these right, it's half the battle, perhaps 3/4 of the battle, okay? And these are all the 5 points are related to possible classroom techniques to actually increase your learners or your own motivation. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I've really enjoyed listening to all of your stories, information, but also all of your stories. Lovely, lovely. I want to get to questions because they've been sort of pouring in. Scott, can you, would you mind sort of emptying? Okay,
absolutely,
lovely.
absolutely. So we're going to take the questions in order, so we may not have time for all of them. And I'd like to apologize at the beginning if I get your name wrong. I do apologize. So our first question was from Robert Schiffer. Is motivational energy similar to working memory in that the different learners have access to differing quantities of it? Can you expand on this? Or can it be expanded on, I should say?
Okay, I'm going to, I didn't realize there would be so many questions, but I'm really, really pleased about it. So I'm going to try to answer them quickly, okay? And so that we can go through. Okay, no, it's different from working memory. Working memory is a capacity, is a cognitive capacity. The unusual thing about this kind of what they call character strengths, or this resource pool, is that it very much works like a resource which you deplete, and then if you have some rest, it will be refueled. And they even say that sleeping helps, and some positive experience. So they even actually can list the kind of things which will help to, having a coffee, having a meal helps. So it very much works like some kind of resource. They even thought that it was glucose. So simply, the glucose, and glucose helps, but it's more than that, so sugar, okay? So it's very, very controversial because psychologists don't like this. On the other hand, all the evidence supports it. And Roy Baumeister, who is championing it, is one of the top 10 cognitive psychologists at the moment. So it's a difficult one, but it's not like a cognitive capacity like working memory.
Excellent, thank you very much. And our next question is by Kaveh Jalizadeh, and is, what is the difference between grit and persistence?
Oh, what a good question. There is a little cottage industry in psychology and now also in second language acquisition of measuring grit, but people use different, at least 6 or 7 different kind of labels. Persistence, grit, resilience, hardiness. Now, the point is, what they find is that they are massively overlapping the various concepts. And so it's more like the differences don't really concern the essence of these, because basically what we are talking about is the simple thing: will you stop in the face of adversity, or will you carry on? So the various concepts differ in their time scales, in how the angle they approach things. But I would say that at the moment, the big problem, and this is acknowledged by leading psychologists, is that the various persistence-related labels are too similar. So we are multiplying the labels and without any real reason.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question is from Matthew. Does washback assessment boost one's motivational energy, as there is a path to the finish line, so efforts can be better directed?
Say it again, Scott, does what?
So Matthew's asking about washback assessment. Let me read the question again. Does washback assessment boost one's motivational energy, as there is a path to the finish line, so efforts can be better directed?
Yes, I would say that definitely assessment can be taken as progress check. Washback can be good, even though we talk about washback mainly in negative terms, because we are saying that because, let's say, the Japanese and university entrance examination system is test-based, the washback is that teachers teach to the test, to prepare students for the test rather than real language learning. But if you take that, put that aside for a moment, tests can be the perfect kind of system of what's called proximal sub-goals, these little structures which you need. You take each one at a time. And so many people have been actually motivated by the exam system. So for example, my son Benny is taking his the big Japanese language test, the highest one, number 1, just this Sunday in Kyoto. And he's been preparing for it. And before that, he took level 2, So this has been a useful progress. So if tests and if assessment is used appropriately, it can have this kind of motivational power.
Excellent. All right, thank you. And we have another one from Jonathan about your upcoming book. He's wondering, how did you choose the exceptional language learners in your book? Did you try to choose a sample size from a variety of languages?
I would love to speak about this for about an hour. This has been, for me, I didn't want to do this research. It's just, I couldn't resist it. It's so exciting. And I realized nobody has ever done this. We don't have a corpus of interviews and studies on these exceptional language learners, the native-like ones. One reason is that there's so much controversy concerning the native-like, what's native-like, some people hate it, some people, this is an ideological kind of nightmare, minefield. But we just said that we are going to look at the exceptional learners who reach a level which every language learner aspires to, where they can be taken as fellow native speakers by native speakers for at least 5 minutes in a casual conversation. And we have no doubt everybody will be kind of caught out at one point. So there are very, very few people who can go on forever. Now, what we did was, there are not many of these because we made it sure that we don't include bilingual learners. We don't, kind of from bilingual families. We don't include anybody who spent, more than a few weeks in the host environment before the age of 18. So we included only people who reached this level through traditional language learning, at least partly, or through adulthood. How did we find them? Well, I sent out emails, and then it was a snowball effect. And we found some people in Japan, some people in Korea. We have a really good sample from Swedish 16-year-old teenagers to retired language teachers. My wife is included, who learned Hungarian at a native-like level. My wife's French and German teacher, who is one of the most incredible language learners, who never spent much time in France or Germany, and he says, well, in German, I'm pretty good. In French, they probably wouldn't take me for French, but they sometimes say I'm Belgian. And I thought, well, that would be wonderful for me if they said, oh, perhaps Zoltan is not English, perhaps Welsh or something, I always wanted to at least pretend for 10 seconds that I am a native speaker. All I need to do is when I call our local takeaway, Indian takeaway, all I need to do is hello, and they already say, hello, Mr. Zoltan. So we, in the end, we found 30 learners. That was our maximum. It was an incredible effort, and they are all very long interviews. Some interviews are 3.5 hours. These people are passionate, and they actually like to talk because they have lots to share. So we have 500,000 words of a corpus, and we are now progressing it. And so that's why it became 2 volumes rather than 1. And it's fascinating. It's totally, well, everything which is there is familiar from the SLA literature, but the priorities, the whole thing is almost like a different kind of angle, a different filter. Their priorities were different. What they paid attention was not what we pay attention to, okay? So I think I'd better stop this now.
All right, thank you. That was very detailed. We appreciate that. So our next question comes from Jared. So forgive me, Jared, I'm just going to have to rewrite your question here. What is the difference? What do you think about the relationship between writing about personal experience and L2 long-term motivation?
Personal experience in what sense?
Maybe Jared could expand upon that in the chat, but for now, why don't we just move on to the next question? Unless he can quickly expand upon that. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. And thank you, Zoltan, for speaking. I'm just talking about creative writing, students writing about their own experiences, their own perceptions, their own emotions, which creates the content for the course, and speaking about their feelings and their emotions and how that links to long-term motivation. Thank you.
That's very clear. That's a really, really good question. I have become recently interested in these autobiographical narratives because this is also related to narrative identity. And this could be, and I have actually once given a whole talk about this, but if you think about it, it's not just your motivation which matters, but also your own personal motivational story which you construct. So, the best example of this is attributions. Like, you take a past failure in your history, and depending on how you explain it, it can be motivating or demotivating. So that they actually, in psychology, they took this further and they said, the stories we create about our own lives, our life narratives, almost create our identities. We narrate ourselves into the people whom we are. So in that sense, this is a very powerful kind of area which has been largely unexplored. You know, Phil Hiver has written 2 articles recently with colleagues on this, but I have the feeling, you know, in my 2 recent books, I talk about narrative identity. I have the feeling that this is almost like an unexploited potential yet, you know, creating narratives. I do touch upon this in my book on vision with Maggie Kubaniova, you know, in creating vision, because you can, you know, guided imagery, guided narratives can create the kind of future vision, but there is more to it. We found it, one of my students found it with anxiety, that some people who could create, you know, sort of constructive, anxious selves could handle anxiety better than some others. So if you manage, you know, Dan McAdams, who is the big psychologist looking into this, looked at redemptive narratives, looked at tragic experiences in American people's lives, which they turned into positive things. And just one example, you know, someone's loss, you know, family member's loss, and they said, yes, it was a tragic thing, but it brought the family together. We are more closely knit now. So looking at the bright side of things, you know, every cloud has a silver lining. So it is very important. Thank you.
Okay, we appreciate the detail there. All right.
Hello, everybody. May I?
Actually, we're going in order here. So questions were asked in order, and we're going by first come, first serve. So if you can put your question in the chat box, please, we'll come to it in turn. Thank you. All right, so Mike had a question here. It is, which is better, and by how much? The student giving themselves positive reinforcement, or the teacher giving positive reinforcement for the same achievement?
In the actual model, I divide the progress checks because it can have these both sides. One is that there is a specific target and the student meets it and the student realizes this, and that's almost like reinforcement. You know, the dieter who steps on the bathroom scales and realizes that I lost 200 grams in a day, and that's it. But teachers can also offer progress checks, and it's called affirmative feedback. And they function in exactly the same way. So that's why I'm saying affirmative feedback. So it's not the kind of general, oh, great, but more like the kind of informative feedback when you say, you have made such progress from last time. You can even, have progress marks. You know, I don't know whether you know that the British secondary school system has given up grades altogether, you know, and it works perfectly well. They set targets for each semester for each student, and then basically the evaluations are things like excellent or good or satisfactory, but based on the targets. It has nothing to do with whether an excellent can be a mediocre level student in comparison to the others, but in terms of their own targets, this student may have achieved excellence. So teachers, various ways of giving affirmative feedback can be a really powerful way of providing the same kind of progress check, which, you know, the tangible progress experience, than, you know, meeting sub goals.
All right, thank you. So we have our next question from Golham Leza, who's asking, I wonder, if self-concordance can be enhanced through intervention?
That's a really good one. That's a really good one. So the question is this: we have a target and which is given, because in educational environments, most targets are given, can we turn this into more self-concordant? My guess is that the answer will somewhere be, be a yes and no kind of thing. So we can certainly make targets more meaningful. We can certainly make, for some learners, we can create that relationship. We can show the link between core values, human values, and the target. But I don't think that it will work with every student in the classroom. So it's one of those things, but we can certainly increase the relevance and the personal meaningfulness of the target.
Sorry, I was the person raising the question. You know, the concordance is in fact preceded by self. Self is something, or objectives of something are set by the person himself. Then how can we make some sort of compromise between what is determined by the person himself and what can be done through intervention so that self-confidence can be enhanced or developed? Or really, that was a key question for me. Thank you very much for your help.
Yes, and as I'm talking, I'm thinking, have I read anything about self-concordance kind of interventions? And the interesting thing about self-concordance is that actually it's Andrew Elliott, the same Andrew Elliott, who introduced this concept with Sheldon. So two big people, but they kind of almost like moved on. This was about 10, 15 years ago. They, it's almost like they introduced the concept and couldn't quite deal with it that much. So and it's Alistair Henry who actually went back, when we were talking about researching directed motivational currents, Alistair almost rediscovered this, and we realized that that's very important for us. And so we started to talk about self-concordance, but it's not there that much in the literature. And probably the reason is because people don't have any ideas about what to do with it. Because self-concordance is the core human, kind of essence. It's associated with that. Now that's quite a long way, away from most educational targets and objectives. You can always include things. So good teachers would bring in big personal issues in education to motivate people. One thing which, I work at an English department where 80% of our students are girls. And you can imagine that my colleague who does gender studies, well, she is the most popular teacher of the whole department because she does it within the framework of sociolinguistics, but of course it's about gender issues, core issues. So that's a nice kind of integration. But, I don't know how far you can take this, whether every topic, every target can be linked to such key ideological kind of beliefs and issues. That's all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, so we currently have 5 more questions. How are you feeling? Shall we keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the next question is from Nazabe, and it says, does self-regulation play a role in developing one's motivation?
Self-regulation is a strange term because it's been used as a synonym for self-control. And, I talked about that. So that's the 5th area, but it's also used more generally, so it's a bit of it's almost like in educational psychology, there was the big issue was learning strategies in the 1980s. And those have been discredited, the research paradigm, because it wasn't completely measurable. And they almost changed into self-regulation. So they started to talk about self-regulation using all the results of learning strategy research, plus they added things. So it suddenly became one of those grand concepts in psychology. There are handbook, the famous handbook, again by Baumeister and Fox. The same Baumeister is now on its 3rd edition. So I would say that self-regulation is definitely a key, and I linked it as one of the 5 components to long-term motivation, but it also can be seen as even more, depending on how you understand it.
Okay, thank you. And our next question is from David. How can children with, for example, ADD or ADHD be encouraged to develop mindfulness in learning and strengthen their sense of self-control?
The honest answer is, I don't know. Sorry, it's such a specialized thing. One of my former students, Judith Kormos, has written on language learning with special needs. Some Hungarian colleagues are doing research on various aspects. I know that it's complicated, and I simply don't know.
Well, we do appreciate the honesty. Okay, and we have another question from Yi. It says, may I ask if there are differences between building up learners' L2 long-term motivation and building up their L2 vision? Can these two be combined?
In many ways, is the same. But in this special framework, which I presented, vision was just one area, the initial how to fortify one's goals. Now, of course, we know that goals are the ultimate driving force. So if you fortify the goals, you can say that that's basically long-term motivation. But by simply equating the two, we would disregard the other 4 components which I listed, which are also very effective. So in some ways, I would say, when you increase people's vision and make it more elaborate and rich and powerful, you are increasing their long-term motivation, but you can promote long-term motivation through other means as well.
So Angela also has a question on vision. She said, would you agree that the vision, seen as essential in long-term motivation, has a close relationship with the fulfillment of facets of one's ideal self? Could you elaborate on it?
Yes, and in my 2020 book, I wrote a whole chapter on vision. And because initially everything started with the ideal self. That's how I got interested in vision, because the initial conceptualization by Marcus and Nurius said that the ideal self is not just a bright idea, an abstract notion, but it's actually something which you see, you imagine. So it's part of almost like fantasy and things. So you see yourself. And I was fascinated. I knew that this is something which is useful for many people. Then when I went into it, back to it and wrote a whole chapter on vision, I realized that there is more to vision than the ideal self. So probably the ideal self construct is one of the most sophisticated kind of conceptualizations of vision or framework for vision. But vision exists, for example, in the mental time travel literature. You won't believe it, that's how they call it. And this is one of the most famous contemporary cognitive psychological kind of direction, mental time travel. And it's also there, about when we talk about emotions. So, it's also there when we talk about dual coding. Working memory was mentioned. In working memory has got a visuospatial component. So it seems that this internal capacity for mental imagery, which humans have, is one of the most fundamental defining features of humanity, and it's been used for many things, including ideal self-images.
Thank you. So we are on our final question now, and it's a question that many people are waiting to hear the answer of. If someone is considering a PhD in motivational or psycholinguistics and SLA, which questions or topics do you recommend looking into?
Well, of course, motivation. Okay, so just, Scott, would you just repeat? So a PhD in what exactly?
They wrote in motivation / psycholinguistics and second language acquisition. So I don't know if that actually exists, but maybe in those fields. Or...
So in this kind of psychological aspects rather than the linguistic aspects of second language acquisition, what are the key topics? That's a very good question, incredibly good question. I would say, that from a purely motivational perspective, I think long-term motivation is the last under-theorized, almost like area. So we more or less covered everything else in motivation, and of course you can fine-tune things, but this is the area which is still, has a lot of work to do. I also believe in engagement, and engagement is simply motivation which is realized. So when you actually engage with an activity and not just are motivated to engage with it. And the reason why this is important is that the 21st century has become accelerated. We are bombarded with, various, requests for our attention. Students are constantly tempted by, social media. You cannot. So let's say 20 years ago, if someone was motivated in something, you could fairly, make the assumption that that will be realized in the long run. Now, you are motivated to do something, and the next minute it can be actually hijacked by something else. So what we need now is not just motivate our learners, but get them engaged so that the action almost seals the deal. So I believe that combining motivation and behavior is something theoretically and practically very important. Some people have started to work, do research on emotions, enjoyment and boredom. So clearly that's an important element of classroom learning. We seem to, kind of take it for granted that it's okay to be a boring teacher. I am not quite sure how far that can go without, I think it still lacks some ideas. So if, you need to relate that to some specific kind of research plan. Also, positive psychology has been recently mentioned a lot. Again, in itself, that's not quite enough. It's very commendable to look at positive things and not just the mistakes and the negative things, which psychology traditionally used to do. But again, it needs ideas. And there was one more thing I was going to say. And I forgot.
So we had one question just come under the wire here. So this will be our last question, I promise. So we have a question from Uma Nula, and her question is altruistic motivation a new concept? Is it a new term, or is it a recycled older term?
Scott, is it altruistic?
That's what they wrote, yes, altruistic motivation. Is that a new concept?
So I didn't use that. In this
Maybe versus intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, is altruistic a different concept, or is it related?
altruistic simply means compassionate, compassion-based. In other areas, I'm very interested in that, but I am not quite sure how it would fit into psychological theories of motivation. Perhaps, do you want to say something else about this, or?
Yes, please do feel free to add to it if you want to unmute your mic. They just wrote, it is a concept where someone is motivated to share for the generational good of others, a general good of others, they corrected themselves.
Okay, so that is actually proper altruistic motivation. I'm just scanning my memory about motivation, whether any mainstream motivation theory has actually touched upon this. I can't think of it. What I haven't talked about it. One thing which I've been interested in the last kind of 10 years is the kind of intersection, almost like, of theology and psychology. So right now, I'm writing a book on the psychology of the fruit of the Spirit, which is basically the ideal kind of Christian character. So in a way, and then I can tell you, altruism, compassion is there in a big, big way. And it's related, of course, it's related to motivational issues. If I think about, the various motivation theories, expectancy value theory, self-determination theory, goal theory, I don't think anybody has really touched upon it. The notion of altruism or pro-social behavior is big. There's a massive literature on that. Okay, so what I think is that it's certainly a very relevant concept, but I don't think that many people have connected the various things together to say, whereas we know that altruistic motivation is big. People are ready to do or sacrifice their lives, for certain causes. So there's no question about the relevance of this. You can imagine that in a more theological kind of framework, again, it's very big, kind of compassionate love, which is actually a psychological concept, very big, becoming again, but somehow it's not being connected to mainstream motivation research as far as I know.
Okay, thank you. I did promise that was the last question, so perhaps we should end there. So what we're going to do now is pass it over to the president. And I want to personally say thank you very much for giving such detailed answers. We really appreciate your time. So Charu, would you like to go ahead now?
Actually, thank you so much, Dr. Dornyei, for the presentation. But before I give my comments, Jackie had something to add.
Sorry, we're passing the baton around. Yeah, just mirroring everyone else. Thank you so much. It's been really lovely to hear lots of stories as well, but just the depth of your knowledge. Thank you very much for sharing with us. I know you were not really excited about Zoom, but you've done a fantastic job. And I really, really appreciate you doing this for us. Really, it's been a great, great evening. So thank you very much. And just in main general notes, I wanted to say congrats again to all of our new officers. Yay, welcome to the team.
And congratulations, Jackie, as well.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back.
And we would love to hear your feedback about tonight's event. So in the chat box, I've got a link to a feedback form. If you'd like to give us ideas about future events, we're happy to hear any ideas that you have. So please share in there if you do. And our events, 21st of July, the Arts and Creativity, the 9th of October about entrepreneurship, and 24th of October, 9th of October and 24th of October, the Young Learners events. We'll put all of this stuff everywhere. So please sign up. We hope that you'll be able to join us for those events. And as Dr. Dornyei said as well, I've got his slides, and we've recorded the event tonight, and we'll be sharing that as well. So thank you very much for sharing your slides. That's really kind of you. But we'll be sharing that with all of you in the internet world, so that you have the details and such about that. So that's it. So thank you once again very, very much for coming along, and I'll pass the baton back to Jen.
Yes, thank you again. We will share the slides, I think, on Facebook and our website. So you should be able to access everything there. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Dornyei, for coming here and for being with us and patiently answering all our questions. We really, really appreciate you coming out online. And I also want to thank all the JALT members who have shown up today, everyone who's attended this event. Thank you for staying with us this long. Thank you for supporting us throughout all of last year. I know it's been a difficult year for all of us. So thank you so much for attending, for being there, for participating. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we can continue to have events like this for all of you. Please do give us your feedback so we know a little more about what you want to hear and what you want to see. And we can make sure we arrange more things for you. Right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. So maybe, Scott, we could do the round of applause now.
Sure,
So
if everyone would like
could
to.
unmute.
Excellent.
Thank
3,
you.
2, 1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just say that
Thank you very
look
much.
forward to seeing all of you in person in Tokyo.
Thanks.
Most
Yokoso.
I do welcome all of you once upon a time in Iran. Thank you very much.
When travel is allowed, we'll all be going somewhere, won't we? Many places.
hopefully.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for coming. Have a lovely evening, and thank you again, Zoltan. Have a lovely Friday. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Good night, everyone.
everyone. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.